Higher People's Court of Fujian Province, Mr. Wu, and President of Higher People's Court of Jiangxi, Madam Ge Xiaoyan, to take your questions. First of all, let's give the floor to Mr. Liu Guixiang. Dear media friends, good afternoon. For the Supreme People's Court to hold this press conference during the 13th Congress, this is the first time for us to do this. And we are quite pleased to discuss with our media friends about this topic and take any question of our media friends. As is known to all, solving the problem of enforcement difficulties is the topic today. But what is enforcement? With the power of the nation, we will be entrusted with certain authority to enforce the policies and deliver the results. For example, we guarantee that the repayment will be done to the right person with our authority. That is one kind of enforcement. The difficulty of enforcement comes from the fact that the judgments may not be able to get timely enforcement. The difficulty has been found a long time ago, since the end of the 1980s. With the market economy's development, different types of cases were erupting, and with the explosive growth of the number of cases, enforcement was quite a difficulty. That's why people usually name this kind of difficulty as enforcement difficulty. I already said that we have a long history of enforcement difficulties, and such a problem has never been eradicated, influencing people's legitimate rights to be realized, and also people's confidence in the judicial system will be impacted as well. So, solving the problem of enforcement difficulty is the concern of the society and the general public. The decision of the fourth plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee explained about the need of solving such enforcement difficulty, and the Supreme People's Court will resolutely implement the arrangement and the decision during the fourth plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee. In March 2016, we proposed the idea of taking 2 to 3 years to solving this difficult enforcement problem and getting rid of this last obstacle in realizing fairness and justice. And now we are already coming to the last year of the deadline. It's like the last examination. But can we present a very good answer? Today, I will be very pleased to discuss frankly with our media friends. Thank you. Now the floor is open to questions.
谢谢主持人，我是人民日报社记者。第一个问题啊，我想提给刘伟强专委。
My first question is to Mr. Liu. This morning, President Zhou, while delivering his work report, said that the target of solving difficult problem has been basically realized.
With People's Daily, my question is for Justice Liu. In the morning, President Zhou Qiang gave a report on the work of the Supreme People's Court, or SPC. He pointed out that the temporary objective of basically addressing difficulties in enforcement of judgments has been realized on schedule. My question is, what changes have taken place in enforcement compared with 3 years ago? Thank you.
I will take this question. In the previous 3 years, different levels of People's Court have been working under the leadership of CPC Central Committee with General Secretary Xi Jinping as the core. We took the route and we followed the two basic principles in striving to conquer difficulties and reforming and innovating. Indeed, our enforcement work has been transformed significantly. Such transformation can even be said as historical. There are several changes that can be felt. The first one is that for the complicated causes of enforcement difficulty, like those entwined complications, we have taken comprehensive measures to solve those problems. Under the party's leadership, the supervision of the People's Congress, and support of the People's Government, as well as the participation of different sectors of the society, they have all contributed to the enforcement improvement. With these social joint forces, we co-managed many obstacles and laid a very unprecedented basis for solving this difficulty. And secondly, a large number of legacy cases have been handled. I already said we had a long history of judgment enforcement difficulty. One manifestation is that a large number of cases have been left unsolved and unhandled. Particularly until 2016, some cases have been left untouched for too many years. So we made efforts to comprehensively investigate those legacy cases and register those cases into our file and system. Then, with screening and investigation, we will take some renewed efforts to solve those cases, safeguard the party's legitimate interests, and further diffuse the disputes. In this process, we have overcome some very difficult cases. With the handling of those legacy cases, we have already reduced some legacy problems in number and burden. For the next step of the battle of solving those difficulty in judgment enforcement, we laid a very sound basis and foundation. Another thing is, for some major changes and reforms, they are taken to solve 4 key issues of judgment enforcement. As we know, there are 4 biggest difficulties in judgment enforcement in history. The first one is the difficulty of locating the person and the certain materials. The People's Court is responsible for locating those people or those needed materials and objects. In some other countries, People's Court is only informed about such information, unlike China. But we have to find those right persons or the right objects on ourselves. We even have to pay visits to the doorsteps of every bank as has been required. So, with such a large number of cases, we have to harness the technology power to cover nationwide and different forms of channels so that all levels of certain investigators can have access to internet to make a key breakthrough in the difficulty of finding right person and the right object. The second difficulty is about cracking down on the avoidance of implementation. For example, hiding their assets or using whatever tool they have to avoid the execution of the decision or judgments. So, for that problem, we introduced the credit-worthy system with a list and a punishment mechanism. With this connected punishment system, those people will be pursued by anyone in punishment. Another problem is about management. In a long period of time, because of the logging of so many cases, sometimes the person cannot guarantee the effectiveness of management of one certain case. So 4 levels of People's Court in China will have a unified case handling platform and procedure management platform. The different time points of handling cases will be supervised by those 4 levels of People's Court. The irregular enforcement in the past can be curbed under this new framework. The last difficulty is about the assets monetization. During the enforcement phase, if our personnel found some assets, particularly cash, that's one good news. It saves time and efforts during the reutilization of this cash. But the situation is quite complicated. Based on our experience, in some localities, 40 to 50, even 60% of those discovered assets belong to vehicles or securities, stocks, real estate, or even sheep and cows. Those are unlike cash. We have to try to monetize those different types of properties. We cannot go through the form of auction because it's time-consuming and it only targets at a very small group of audience. So one important task for us is about monetization in order to make this process more efficient. And we have seen a lot of backstage operation. And power rent seeking is accused by the public a lot.
投诉率、维护纪委、违法违纪，目前几乎是零。这4大难题的破解，我认为是这2到3年基本解决执行难的一个重大变化，机制性的变化，模式性的变化。第3点呢，我们在规范化方面发生了重大的变化。所以说，过去人民群众深恶痛绝的消极执行、拖延执行、选择性乱执行问题，还有我们的执行作风不端。
There are a postponed or unstandardized law enforcement.
是我们必须是下决心。
And in some cases, people are not strict enough in the law enforcement. To solve the problem, we can take 2 measures. The first, we have to set up the database based on the information technology, and the second is the system support. In recent years, we have built up more than 50 judicial explanations, which would help us to make the application of the judicial authority more strict and more standardized. And we have to pay attention to the abuse of judicial authority. We have to draw a red line to show people how could we abide by the rules. In recent years, for the law enforcement, there are also people, as many as 50, to be moved away from their positions, and they can no longer work at the position of the judicial law enforcement because they are the black sheep and they have not lived up to the expectations of the people. And another big change,
人民群众反映强烈的一些突出问题。
we have helped to solve the outstanding problems announced by the mass.
就是
One example
我们的执
is
行案款，历史性的
that
执行案款
the law
沉积的
enforcement
比较多，管理也比较混乱，好多不能及时发放到当事人手里。
has formed a lot of
因此，我们
accumulation of
联合最
assets,
高人民
and the
检察院
management is in a mess.
用了9个月的时
So
间，对所有
For
的
the
执行案
Supreme
款
People's Court,
全
we
面
have
清理，历
spent
史案
9
款
months
960
to
亿，
have the
全部
liquidation
发放。
of these
借
assets
此，
and
基础上建立
redistribution
了
of
一
the
个案一账
assets.
号的这种强
Based
长效
on
机
that,
制。我可以负责
we
任
have
说，
set up
执行
one
案
bank
款管
account
理
for
混乱的
each
这种局面
case,
廉政风
so
险这个
there's
存在的
no
问题，
longer
我认为会一去不复返。
an unorganized
还有一个就是
management of the
涉民生
assets
案件，
engaged in cases.
涉
And
中
for the other
拖
cases
欠中
related
小
to
企业和
people's
民营企
daily
业
life,
账款的
for
这类案件，
example, sometimes
建
the
立了
small and medium
一套
enterprises and private
加大
enterprises
执行力
cannot
度的这种机制，
receive the due payment in time. In that scenario, we have
执
set
行
up
效
the
果
mechanism.
是非常明显。
The law
等等等等
enforcement
吧
is quite
我们通过
effective.
由这些变化，我们也可以看到一个实际效果方面的一些变化。我可以在这边说几
We
个
have
数据。
noticed the substantive progress.
我们
I could give you
法
some
定期限内有
examples.
财产可供执行的
Within
实际
the
执结率
judicial term,
90.4%。
90.4%
这3年我们执行案款，也就是装到
cases
老百姓口袋
have
里，当事人
seen
口袋里
their
真金白银
assets
4.4万亿，
enforced.
同比增加了71.2%。
That is 4.4 trillion
还有
yuan,
由
a
于执行环
year-on-year
境的这种
increase
变
of
化，当事人的
71%.
自动履
And
行
second,
力也在
due
提高
to。the law enforcement environmental
那么
change,
16年、
the
17年、
party
18年，
engaged
这
have
3年
also
结
raised
合在
their
一起，
awareness
对人
for
民法院的裁判文
2016,
书的自动履行
2017,
力
and
提高了10个
2018.
百分点。
The automatic law enforcement
还有在这个我再
ratio
说一
has
个
been
现象，
improved by
大家知
10%.
道，
There's another phenomenon
人
for
民
you
银
to
行
know.
世界银行啊，有个营
The
商
World
环境
Bank
的评估，
has an assessment for the business environment,
合同执行指标，
among which there is an indicator called
在
the
评估中
execution
位
ratio
列
of contract,
全球第6。
and China is ranking 6th place in that
由此我们也
assessment of the World
看
Bank.
到我们在执行
From
方面
that example,
强制执行
you
方面
could
一些变
see
化。
that China has made real progress in terms of the
谢谢。
law enforcement.
请继续提问。
Thank you.
中区第4排那位女士，在。
谢谢主持人。中央广播电视总台央广记者提问：我们观察到有些地方法院是举全院之力来攻坚执行，可以说属于非常时期的非常之举。我的问题是，请问刘专委，这样的状态可否持续？攻坚之后会不会又回到原来的状态？谢谢。
With China National Radio, we've learned that many local courts are leveraging most of their resources to address enforcement difficulties. This is part of our annual campaign launched at our annual time. My question is for Justice Liu. Is it sustainable? Will enforcement difficulties reappear when the campaign is over? Thank you.
好，我简要回答一下这个问题。您提这个问题啊，
Okay,
非常好。
I will give you a very
我
brief
相信呢也
answer.
是
First of all, it's a great
很多
question.
社会上一些
I believe that
老
many
百姓
people
呢，可能是有质疑、有心存疑
from the
问题。
mass, they
有
have
很多
the
人也答到
similar
我的面
doubt
说，
as you do,
你这
and
3
some
年
even told
采
me
取了
that
这样的措施，你们几乎是各级法院举
over the
全院
past
之力。
3
这种情况
years,
能够长期的
you
持
have
续下去
taken
吗？
so many
你会
measures
不会又回到了
and
过
you
去
have
你们历史
leveraged
上也
the
有100
majority
万
of
案
the
件大刑法，
resources in the
什
local
么
courts?
无
Could
执行
this
羁
be
案的这些
sustainable?
专项活动？但是其
In
结
the
果
past,
是
there
新的
have
有
been
积，旧的
similar
有新。
missions,
那么这次
and the results are
会不
not
会
satisfying.
经
Once
过
you cleared
2、
out
3
all
年
the
的攻坚，
accumulated
每年
cases,
你都
and
有
later there
又
are
会
new
有
ones
新产生的
postponed
6、700万件的案件，
accumulated.
会不会又是新的案件
Now
堆
you
积
have
下
cleaned
来，
everything
回到
up,
原点了？
and then after 1 year there may be
对这个
another
问题呢，
600 to
我
700
非常自
cases.
信告诉各
To
位，
that question,
肯定
with all confidence, I could tell you
为
that
什么？
this
我
scenario
想
will not happen
首先一
again.
点，我刚才
Why?
已经说了，我们这
The
次
first
是
reason,
对
as I have
几十
mentioned
年的
before, is that
所有的我们不放心
this
的案
time
件进行了一次
we have
统牌的
gone
审
through
查。
all
纳
the
入到
cases
我们的案
that
件管
we
理
are
系
not
统和立规
satisfied
范
with and we have not accomplished over the
所以说
past
永远在这
years.
些案件在监控之下。那么把这些
So
案
all
件的
these
消化，
cases
使
are
我们
under our
卸下来这
supervision.
些沉重的历史
Once
包
we
袱
can
我们
digest
过去
these
的案件的积累
cases, it
使
means
我
a
们
historic burden
负重
is
前
off.
行，举步艰难。那么现在卸下来这个
And
包
due
袱，
to those
使我们的
cases,
整
in the
个的
past,
执
over a
行
long
工作
period of time,
进
we
入
have
到一个
marched
良性循环的状态。
in difficulty, and now since all these accumulated old cases
我
are
们
cleared
的
up,
心里是有
we have opened a new chapter and we can march faster.
这次的我们的
And
2到3
second,
年基本解决执行难，是
for the period of 2
坚
to
持
3
标准
years,
坚持
we basically solved the problem of the
也就是说，
difficulties
我
in
们
law
在攻坚
enforcement.
山头
Actually,
的
we
时候
have tackled not
削
only
平
the
山头的时候，
syndromes,
同
but
时在做
also symptoms, but
监
also
管
the roots of the problem.
铺路架桥的功夫。
We
举个
have
例子说，
tried our
我
best
刚
to
才
set
说
up
到
the
我们的
structure. I will
全
give you
国法
one
院都在
example.
广泛适用的网拍系统，
I said
得到了人民群众的
before that
充分认可。
across the country, the
这是一
local
套
courts have
各
used
级
the
法院
online
潜入到
auction
我们的工
system.
作系统里
This
边
has
儿一个
become popular
一个工
among
作
the
系统
people.
生产系统。
This is a working mechanism, a production mechanism,
编制着一个网络化的查控系统。
and we have also
坐
built
在
up
办公室
a
就可以，
online
我坐在
check
北京的办公
system.
室可以查新疆的，
When I
信
was
一
in
个
the
农村
office
信
in
用社，
Beijing, I could click
存
on
款
the
问题，
mouse to
可以
see
查
what
中
is
俄
the
边界
status
的一个
quo
信用
of
社的
the
存款问题。
cash and
这样的
liquidity in
这样的一
Xinjiang
个网络
Autonomous
体系，
Region, and
能够
even
逆
I
网
could know what is going on with the work
我们的
overseas.
信用惩戒得到人民
And
群
the
众的
credit
和社
punishing
会的
system
广泛认可。
is widely recognized by the people and the society. Most of them, I mean, all the honest people are praising us for doing this. It is already a fixed mechanism. Thus, all these measures, they are effective and they can remain effective for a long time to go. Even though we still have a long road to walk, but I believe that the future is very promising for us. Based on all the work we have accomplished, I think the status quo will be irreversible and we will not go back to the old path. And we also have the comprehensive planning for the future work. I will not go into details, and that's all. Thank you.
谢谢主持人。中国日报记者提问：我们注意到，现在街头的电子屏幕、老赖地图等经常曝光一些老赖的这个信息，产生了巨大的反响。想请问刘专委的是，这种做法是否有法律依据？法院在实际的执行工作中，如何处理好曝光和保护隐私的之间的关系？谢谢。
With China Daily, this question is for Justice Liu. We've noted that defaulters' information has often been exposed on big screens, on streets, or on smartphone apps, which has had a major impact. Is there any legal basis for such exposure? How does the court properly handle the relationship between exposure and privacy protection? Thank you.
你刚才说的老赖，在法律意义上，它是叫做失信被执行人，它是指的有履行能力，但是逃避执行。
Those are the people who have the capacity to abide by the rule of law enforcement, however, they refuse to apply those actions. So today they are classified as the honest people who have lost their credit rating. According to the Article 225 in the civil law, there is the stipulation, and then the Supreme People's Court has made its judicial explanation. The disclosure of information on these people is a correct and a reasonable action. During the law enforcement work, we have to protect people's legitimate rights and interests. However, the disclosure of information of the dishonest people is not in conflict with the protection of the personal secrets. We will not disclose the information of all the dishonest people. We just publicize a few of them in order to form a representative case so that the other people know what they can do.
Secondly, for the content of the disclosure, they are totally within the legal boundary. For those unallowed information by the law, we will not disclose them. For example, the employer of the breakers or their contact information will not be open to the public. Thirdly, for the information that is legally allowed, when the People's Court is disclosing such information, we will have some technical handling of such information. For example, for the dates of birth, we will cover the dates on the identity card of those trust breakers in order to guarantee the protection of their privacy. So with those efforts, we will aim at building such a trust-based society and realizing a success in the battle of 3-year campaign. For example, in December 4th, 2015, Jiangxi Higher People's Court, Jiangxi Daily, and 18 other media groups have established a platform to disclose the information of trust breakers. We can make joint efforts to punish those breakers and also improve self-supervision based on this platform. If those breakers are publicized to the general public, they will face punishment from different sources. And if they have corrected their behaviors, we will cancel the list, and the punishment will be canceled as well. The certain parties can go to such a platform to check the progress of their cases. They can also go online to make complaints or give feedback about illegal execution of those executors. In the past 3 years, based on this platform in Jiangxi province, we have contributed greatly to building a trust-based Jiangxi province and Jiangxi with rule of law. And it has been welcomed by different circles of lives. The Supreme People's Court and CBRC and other agencies have published a certain document highlighting the importance of promoting these pilots nationwide. So we have to improve our mechanism in practices. It's the same thing with the list of names of those trust breakers. We will keep improving such a system, particularly playing a bigger role and making bigger contribution to building a confidence-based society. Thank you.
中间那位男士。
谢谢主持人，我是光明日报全媒体记者。今天上午的最高人民法院工作报告指出，基本解决执行难，虽然实现预期目标，但在有些方面、有些地区，执行难问题仍然存在，甚至还较为突出。请问，接下来人民法院应该如何加以解决？谢谢。
With Guangming Daily, it is pointed out in the SPC work report that the objective of basically addressing enforcement difficulties has been fulfilled. But such difficulties still exist or are serious in some areas. What measures will be taken to resolve them? Thank you.
I will briefly take your question. This morning, the work report of the Supreme People's Court has the mentioning that we have basically reached the target of solving the enforcement difficulty problem on time. And it also mentioned that we are deeply aware that compared to the objective of fully eradicating the difficulty of enforcement proposed by the 4th plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee, we are still lagging behind. And in some certain localities, the enforcement difficulty is still lingering on or even very pronounced. So, by observing the spirit of problem-oriented, as I already said with our media friends, we shall never stay away from problems. We are very clear about our loopholes of the past years. From the angle of information system building, for example, the checking system and control system, even though in the past we can still manage to crack down on those illegal behaviors, there are some transfer of assets or hiding assets behavior. They may ask others to register the assets under their names on their behalf. Also, our control system may have some congestion problem, when there are explosive number of cases. So we have to conquer that difficulty. Another point is everyone is speaking highly of our joint punishment system. But can we automatically identify those people and punish those people like we did in avoiding their admission into the highway or airport ticket buying system? So for the actual results, I think they're not very good, especially when compared to our expectation. Within our court system, in some places, some executors are still taking very negative attitude, or they are abusing their power in actual enforcement. Some executors are not observing the righteous working style. There are even illegal behaviors. So such behaviors will impair the credibility of our court system and hamper the confidence of the common people in the court. Additionally, some long-pending cases are not fully handled. With these issues, we must look at the target of fully solving the difficulty of enforcement and keep up our good job and take solid efforts and rise up to the challenge in the long run. To that end, we have made some overall arrangement. Firstly, we already promulgated certain policies for solving the enforcement difficulty for the next 5 years. From the reform of enforcement model to the updating and upgrading of the entire information system, we had put in place an overall plan. And secondly, relevant departments are trying to lay out the scheme of getting to the root of enforcement difficulties. Thirdly, People's Court will also make some efforts to improve the overall quality of our executors. For now, the team of executors in People's Court is not meeting our expectation and meeting the need of this campaign. So we have to make some new efforts to build a reinforced legislation system. The Supreme People's Court, according to the requirement of the CPC Central Committee, is stepping up our efforts of legislation. We hope that by the end of this year, we can submit our proposal to the National People's Congress. We are also trying to improve our system concerning enterprises, particularly when they are on the brink of bankruptcy. We are also trying to extend our coverage to include the bankruptcy of individuals. with a sound mechanism. So we already have some considerations about the next step. Surely we will intensify our efforts. Instead of taking a step back from the current workload, we will truly divert our efforts to solving the root problem of enforcement difficulty. Thank you.
谢谢主持人。中国国际电视台 CGTN 提问，我的这个问题同样是问给刘专委的。您刚才给我们具体介绍了一下我们这2年在执行难上取得的一些成效。您刚才也说到了，啃了很多硬骨头。可是我在跟身边很多朋友交流的时候呢，他们也有一个感受，就是说，法院花了那么多力气去解决执行难，可是还是有一些案件得不到执行。那么您认为到底问题出在哪里？我们怎么样才能把书面上的成效和人民群众的感受切实地结合在一起呢？谢谢。
With CGTN, this question is for Justice Liu. In your opening remarks, Justice Liu, you said that a lot of progress has been made in addressing the enforcement difficulties, and a lot of tough challenges have been tackled. But we still feel that the judgments of some cases around us haven't been well enforced. Then what is the reason for this? How to make sure that the general public can feel that the relevant cases have been enforced? Thank you.
好，您提这个问题啊，应该说是我们的一个痛点。我作为
The question you raised is our pain point. As one member of the enforcement team in the past several years, I do agree that some cases cannot guarantee the full enforcement. For example, the cash cannot be put in the certain person's pockets. So that is the problem we are facing. And I want to share with you about the status quo, about such cases. For one type of those cases, there is actually certain asset to be rehandled, but they are not put in the right place. It fully reflects the complication of the enforcement process. For example, when we are handling a real estate property, when we are trying to auction it, someone just pops out and says that is my house. And after giving objection to the auction, there will be direct lawsuit. And during the first and second hearings, maybe 9 months have already passed. Another example, also one way to handle the assets. Some assets are not needed in the market, so the auction will be a failure. Then someone may say that I don't agree of repaying the credit with those properties. Then there is nothing we can do to handle the property. Sometimes there may be different lenders who need repayment, so there is another distribution issue for us in the execution process. If we don't have very fair and balanced distribution, then there will also be objection.
So we should have this relief procedure and consider all the concerned parties' interests. To accomplish that, we need more time. So when we are setting our core indicators for the 2 to 3 years, then for the available property, we have set the target at 90%. So that's why we couldn't set it at 100%, because there are some special cases where we cannot simply give the property back to the other to get them reimbursed. There are also the cases with negative law enforcement. And sometimes for one personnel, he's responsible for thousands of cases. So at one time, he could only deal with several. and he has to take one step after another. But this kind of situation is quite rare, and gradually when we are progressing, the total number of the unsolved cases is decreasing. And then there's another thing related to people's feelings, is that when we cannot have the law enforcement applied, just now we have mentioned dishonest people who has the money, but he refuses to pay back the money. But there's a second case in which that dishonest people doesn't have any money, but has already borrowed money. In that case, how could we make sure the law enforcement is in place? And the court has tried everything possible, but still cannot find anything available, anything valuable with this dishonest person. We did make efforts. We have engaged the resources. However, there's zero result. In that case, we will feel frustrated. But that situation does exist. For enterprises, we all know there are zombie enterprises. And there are many of them, actually. The zombie enterprises, in our judicial procedure, cannot give us any property to handle. And also for the individual debt, they represent 70% of our law enforcement case. For example, the disputes with the car accident, for the damage of the people, and the illegal civil landing, etc. Usually the person concerned, he is already very poor and financially weak. That's why he has borrowed the money, and then with the law enforcement, he has more problem and difficulty in paying back the money. For example, there's a very poor guy. He has borrowed the money to rent a car, and then his car luckily ran into a car accident. He has to pay even more for that car accident damage. In that case, we cannot handle that case immediately, and that is a rare case. In that case, we consider it as the commercial risk and even the commercial trap. Sometimes it's the legal risk. In that case, for the court, has the greatest difficulty in finding the accessible property to deal with. And you can come up with a lot of similar examples. But the tricky thing is that every year we have a lot of cases like that, and it's in accumulation. And every year we are under great pressure to deal with these cases. So we have one practice like the termination of this case. It's like the temporary closure of the case. Since we cannot find any available property of this person, we will issue a verdict of a termination of the case. We put it in our archives. Every 6 months, we will do the screening. Once we find out that this person has gained money or has received any property, then we will restart this procedure of law enforcement. And on our internet system, we are still controlling that person, and we are overseeing whether this person has started a luxury consumption or anything. Just now I have given to you an example. If the person is in need, then we will give the judicial relief to that to solve the immediate difficulty. And in that case, what worries us most is whether the court could find the difference between the case with available property and the other cases with no available properties. We have published in this case the judicial explanation, and our supervision system is also following those actions. For the court, we are carefully assuming our responsibilities. That is my answer to this question. And I have talked a little bit more due to the special characteristics of the situation.
我有个问题想要请教，就是关于反腐败行动当中的涉案财产处理问题。我们关注到18大以来，应该是中央持续加大了这种反腐的力度，同时也有不少的贪官落马。那这些贪官当中也有很多的巨贪，想请问一下，就巨贪背后的这么多钱，我们怎么处理？另外一点，这些贪官同时其实也会被处以罚金或是没收财产。 那么这一块的案款是怎么执行的？谢谢。
With the paper, since the 18th Party Congress, the CPC Central Committee has taken strong measures to fight corruption and punish many corrupt officials. Corruption proceeds in some cases are quite large. How to deal with such proceeds? Some corrupt officials would be subject to fines or confiscation of assets. How to enforce such judgment? Thank you.
好，我简要回答一下这个问题。党的18大以来啊。
Since the 18th CPC Congress, all levels of People's Court have worked under the strong leadership of the CPC Central Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core. And we have applied the central instructions of the fight against corruption. We have assumed the responsibility of the judicial authority, and we have acted according to the law and worked in an orderly and effective manner. We have handled a series of cases with corruption and corrupted officials. While playing our role of judicial authority against the corruption, we have also strengthened that punishment for the economic crimes of these parties concerned, so that the cost of committing a crime is increasing nowadays. For the economic criminals, they will be deprived of the economic foundations. By August 2015, the MPC Standing Committee has adopted the number 9 criminal law amendment, among which one important article saying that we will add up the total amount of financial punishment, the fine for the criminal and also the corrupted officials. We have also published a judicial explanation based on the major sentence. There are multiple layers of possible amount of fines. For the corrupted criminals, they will suffer from a higher amount of fine compared with the other criminals of the economic crimes. For those illegal income of the criminals not yet held back, we have to work until the end. Once there's a new discovery, we need to get the payment back. After the 18th CPC Congress, there are 117 cases with corruption related. Among these 117 people, there are 29 people have their all assets fiscated, and some of them, another proportion of them, will also have one part of the property confiscated. This kind of punishment can facilitate our law enforcement, since we will confiscate the majority part of their property.
谢谢主持人。法制日报全媒体记者提问。我们的问题是，关于对于农民工讨薪、交通肇事赔偿、赡养费、抚养费等涉民生执行案件，执行效果如何？谢谢。
With Legal Daily, enforcement has been carried out for judgment of cases related to people's livelihood, such as the wage claim of migrant workers, traffic offense compensation, alimony, and upbringing costs. How effective is such enforcement? Thank you.
I will take that question. We always say that every tiny part of the daily life of the people is a big issue. It is related to our work and also to people's benefits. We, the People's Higher Court, always consider this as top our priorities. The People's Higher Court has attached great importance to this issue for the mechanism, methods, and guarantees. We have strengthened the law enforcement to secure people's daily life. We have also published the guidelines for the lower level of People's Courts. Take example of the courts in the Fujian province for the cases related to people's lives, like you have mentioned, the wage claim for the migrant workers, and also the living support. These are always in the heart of our work. We have combined the centralized law enforcement with the conventional law enforcement. We have also combined the law enforcement facing the general public and facing a special team, a special group of people. We have also combined the conventional measures with the new measures. According to our past experience, the result is satisfying. I'd like to brief to you those outcomes.
Firstly, we are working on some key pillars. We have opened the Green Pass for cases involving the traffic accident offense compensation or migrant workers' wage claims. So we give priorities to those cases with prioritized filing and compensation disbursement and so on. For example, last year, for the cases handled involving people's livelihood was about 33,000, and the total sum of money involved was about 1.267 billion RMB yuan. We have benefited 18,000 migrant workers. Secondly, we are encouraging the voluntary enforcement to help the migrant workers. So for cases involving people's livelihood, we consider it relevant to enterprises development. We try to maximize the benefits of people's livelihood. For example, the Fujian Intermediate People's Court in Fujian province used to handle one case about the real estate market. With the enforcement, we have changed the situation of the property. In the past, this property was deemed as unfinished building. If it was taken as unfinished building in auction, it can be sold at a very low price. But then we transformed this building. 1/4 of the areas in this building have been valued higher, and 3,452 owners of apartments have solved the problem of licensing and ownership registration. So we avoided the loss for those over 3,000 households. That is one good example of the effects of performing the enforcement in good faith. Every year, in different seasons, we may have different battles. For example, last year we had some key campaigns like the 100-day campaign. Those campaigns will surely integrate the cases involving people's livelihood with centralized execution and enforcement. For example, on January the 9th, 2019, we had another campaign of concentrated enforcement. Our People's Court has cleared 19 properties and took 43 debtors in custody, and 39.87 million RMB yuan was involved. 4 million rescue fund was disbursed to help those people. So we can guarantee our authority being felt to improve people's livelihood. With certain clues of property, we will check the situation and identify the debtor according to the law, and we will put those debtors in the list. If they offend the legal requirements severely, we will punish them. To give you some information, during the Spring Festival 2019, we had a Far Eastern enforcement campaign. In this campaign, we took 200 people in our control efforts, and we also put 245 people in custody. 5 people were deemed as criminal offenders. 60 people were banned from going abroad. Some debtors are penalized with a sum of money at about 200,000 RMB yuan. So if they are the judgment debtor, they will face a lot of limitations. So we have cultivated a very good atmosphere of abiding by the law. The 5th measure of enforcing the cases relevant to people's livelihood is about the combination of enforcement and the social security scheme to guarantee the bottom line. Since last year, we explored the ways of combining the law enforcement with insurance scheme in the province. In addition to traditional methods, we exploit the power of insurance to extend the sources of fund with the rescue efforts from the judicial system added by the insurance support. We have disbursed about 81.74 million RMB yuan, benefiting 4,900 people. People's livelihood is exactly at the heart of people's mind. We understand that for cases involving people's livelihood, we shall always bear in mind people's benefits. So for the next step, we will reinforce our efforts in enforcing the cases relevant to people's livelihood and guarantee the rule of law for people's welfare and ensure the bottom line of our people's lives so that more money will flow to the pockets of the general public. And in the enforcement process, our general public will have higher sense of attainment and sense of happiness. Thank you.
东区第4排那位女士。
谢谢主持人。广西广播电视台记者提问：我注意到前2天，也就在两会期间，广西玉林中院的一名执勤干警在上班期间突发疾病，不幸去世。请问法院在保护干警的人身安全和身心健康方面有什么举措？谢谢。
With Guangxi Radio and TV station, I've noted that in the past couple of days, which is during the 2 sessions, an enforcement officer of Yulin Intermediate Court died of heart attack when he was on duty. What measures will be taken to ensure the safety and physical and psychological health of enforcement officers? Thank you.
好，我回答一下这个问题。
I will take your question.
在今天上午的最高人民法院的工作报告里边
In the work report of the SPC in the morning,
工作岗位的干警这3年是46人。
it mentioned
如果加上
46
刚才您
officers.
提到的玉林的，是玉林的是吧？这一位。
If added by the one officer you mentioned in Yulin, then the number of officers who sacrificed their lives on their post was 47. So this number showcased the sacrifice made by our officers who are willing to give themselves to their job. They have made tremendous efforts on their post. 1 year ago, in the Higher People's Court of Heilongjiang Province, the Director General of that court was above 50 years old. After making arrangement about law enforcement in other places, he just sacrificed his lives. So we shared such sadness of those situations, and we totally understand that usually when enforcing one case, it's very heavy workload. Nationwide, one officer will have to handle over 150 cases on average. In developed provinces or cities like Guangdong and Shanghai and Beijing, one officer may have to handle over 1,000 cases. With this mounting number of cases and the higher expectation from the relevant parties, our officers have to work around the clock.
确实这是一个现实的问题。
That was quite a realistic issue.
关心干警，爱护干警，也是最高法院和
We care for the officers.
一直非常高度重视。
Different levels of People's Court has always been concerned about those officers. For example, in some campaigns, there are slogans like some officers are not going to take a holiday during the campaign, but still, we urge those officers to take a shift and take some leaves. They cannot do their job at the cost of their lives. So we recommend our officers to examine their physical condition regularly. we truly want to reduce the psychological pressure our officers are bearing. We are also discussing with the other relevant agencies to come up with some better solutions, for example, outsourcing of certain jobs. We are also hiring more people, trying to reduce the workload of the judges and the officers. Now, we are progressing with those measures, and we are also introducing the intelligence level to improve efficiency of enforcement. AI and machines can replace the officers doing some supporting job. This is also another way of reducing the burden on officers. More importantly, as has been mentioned, our enforcement has already entered into a virtuous cycle. So, we will just follow the normal procedure in this virtuous cycle. I think the physical and psychological health of our officers will not be a big problem at this stage. Among the 47 officers who sacrificed their lives, they have met violence, which cost their lives. For some others, they went to the site in early morning, particularly in those traffic accidents cases. All in all, we will take effective measures to care for the physical health and the mental health of our officers. Thank you.
谢谢主持人。中央广播电视总台国广记者提问。刚才刘专委您提到了有关老赖这个群体的话题啊，我们的问题也是跟这个有关。社会上很多老赖他们欠钱不还，一方面呢，他们转移或者隐匿这个资产，另一方面他们还会享受这种高消费的生活，甚至说有的时候过得比这个债权人都还要好。那么我的问题是，法院在制裁这种恶劣现象这方面会有哪些措施？谢谢。
With CGTN, some defaulters are not paying back the money, but trying their best to hide or transfer assets. They still have a lot of money to spend and are living a better life than the creditors. What can the court do to deal with them? Thank you.
好，我回答一下这个问题。对于刚才说到的这种教科书式这种老赖，大家社会上都是。
For the problem of defaulters and trust breakers, even the textbook has discussed this problem. What are the effective measures to crack down on those defaulters? We already have some practices.
We have to have a thorough execution of the law, and also we have to use the forceful power of the state, and we have to be very flexible too. In recent years, by cracking down those crimes, there are 13,000 people sentenced. For example, in the Article 313 of the criminal law, there is the stipulation about the avoidance or the refusal to pay back the money. And then there is also the judicial custody. There are 506,000 people in this case. There are also 34,000 people restricted in their daily consumption. And we have also applied the list of the judgments that there are 10 million people involved. I'd like to give you some more explanation in this case. You may wonder why this big number of the judgment data. Actually, every year there are millions of people involved, and then accumulated year on year, this figure would exceed 10 million. And for certain judgment data, they may be involved in several cases, so they are included into the list of the judgment data for several times. Currently, there are 8 million people on that list online, and less than 5 million market entities are involved. Anyway, by this blacklist, there are important and effective ways to restrict them from the high-level consumption, the luxury consumption. And then we have already made some progress. However, we will continue with that. By our working mechanism, we should tackle with a case where people are using the shareholder relations to transfer their assets or to hide their assets. Because some people coming from the same company, they want to transfer their assets one to another in order to stay clear from that property and will not be judicially enforced. So for the court, how could we better use the coordination of different authorities to solve that problem? I think we can read again the Article 20 of the corporate law. We can bring into full play the mechanism described in the Article 20, so there will be the collateral liabilities. And then we should also consider to use the multiple measures of investigation and control. For example, we can do the auditing on enterprises. This is very complicated but also effective. Some enterprises have made a loan of more than 1 billion yuan during several years' time. However, there is zero capital on their balance sheet. That is abnormal, and there is a problem. This is an example to show us how could we use multiple measures to discover the problem and be more effective in cracking down the avoidance of law enforcement. Thank you.
西区第3排那位男士。
谢谢主持人。经济日报融媒体记者提问。我们知道呢，对一些企业的执行，有时候会面临一些这个两难的一个境地。有的企业呢陷入了这个债务危机，这个时候法院如果加大执行力度的话，会让企业进入这个造成这个企业的破产。那么我想请问刘专委，你们怎么来处理这种常说的这种善意的执行与这个加大执行力度之间的一个矛盾？请您说一下，谢谢。
With Economic Daily, judgment enforcement on some companies may lead to a dilemma. As the court strengthens enforcement measures, companies would fall into a debt crisis or even go bankrupt. How to ensure both the good faith and strength of enforcement? Thank you.
好，我回答一下。刚才您说这个问题啊，问这个问题啊。
I'd like to take that question.
对于执行工作来说呀，我认为这是一个更高层次、更高境界的。
What you have mentioned actually arrives at a higher level of our law enforcement work. That is to see how could we combine a strengthening effort of law enforcement with the goodwill and good faith for a better social effect. To the one side, We should never be kind to the defaulters, because that is decided by the requirement of the market and the credit system of the society. And to the other side, during the law enforcement process, as you have mentioned in your question, we may enter into a certain dilemma. For an enterprise, they have the technological capacities, they have the skilled workers, and they have a promising future. However, due to certain social factors, they go into the debt crisis and don't have enough cash flow. In that case, the local court and financial institutions come one and another to close down that enterprise. With that huge pressure and attack, no enterprise could survive. How could we save this situation? In that scenario, we have to form our law enforcement personnel so that they can have a high quality of law enforcement. We have to be very prudent and also flexible during the law enforcement. We have to make judgment case by case. I'd like to raise several points. First of all, in front of this case, the People's Court will try its best to have the mediation. For one party, they can have their property protected. You can offer a guarantee, and then you provide a plan for the payment. In that case, the enterprise could secure their future and protect their workers. And secondly, we should connect the law enforcement and the bankruptcy mechanism. In China, we have this system of the enterprise bankruptcy and law enforcement. For a promising enterprise, if they go bankrupt and carry out a reorganization of the enterprise, upon the goodwill and accordant and agreement among all the shareholders, then in this case we can have a new mix of debt. So the bankruptcy and reorganization is a very good remedy to save the enterprise out of difficulty. That's why in some countries we call the law on bankruptcy the law of renewal. Some enterprises are afraid of bankruptcy. When mentioning bankruptcy, we think it's a very sad thing to do. However, by going bankrupt and reorganizing the structure of the enterprise, we can embrace a new life of the enterprise. And for the court, when blocking and controlling the asset, we should know the limit, and there is a red line to not cross. We should never go beyond too far those limits. And for the agricultural machineries and the production vehicles, we don't need to confiscate them in a blocked way. We can take control of that in another innovative way. When giving the law enforcement, we will try our best to find a method that will do the least harm to the operation of the enterprise. And one more thing, we cannot take a civil crime as the criminal crime. All in all, during the law enforcement, our judges should have a very strong idea. He should ask himself, how could we best serve the interests of the country and the party? We cannot adopt measures as we like without considering the legal and social effects. Thank you. The next question, please.
第三排那位女士，第三排。
谢谢主持人，我是来自中国网的记者。我的问题是，我们关注到在媒体报道中提到失信被执行人的孩子不能上学，我们想知道是否确有这样的事情发生？谢谢。
With China.org.cn, it is reported that some kids of defaulters couldn't go to school. Is it really the case? Thank you.
好，我简要回答一下这个问题啊。
I'll answer this question very briefly.
对失信被执行人呢，采取信用惩戒措施。刚才。
We will carry out the punishing measures against those defaulters. Just now, the two presidents have introduced the multiple measures. We have a lot of options, as many as 30 big categories and 100 items, among which there is one restriction on the luxury education program that is in that restrictive list. The so-called highly charged luxury education means that schooling fee is much higher than the ordinary school. And then the second, we will see who will pay for that high schooling fee. If it is not paid by the defaulter himself or herself, then it is not included in our range of discussion. We cannot take all the cases of normal schooling as the schooling case mentioned in our list. Last year, by July or August, there's a report about a child in southern China. He is admitted in university, and people has put the limit on the access to university for this child because his parents are the defaulters, and finally, in order to let the child go to university, the defaulter has paid back. Actually, there is a huge misunderstanding in that case. In that scenario, the father of the child in the case has owed 200,000 yuan to another. And then the child was admitted to university, and he talked with his friends, and his friends told them that maybe this will make it impossible for you to go to the university.
So, we must have a clear interpretation. I also heard that some foreign media groups are accusing China's judicial system of those affected people being larger groups, but we don't. Thank you.
谢谢主持人。新华社记者提问：我们知道那个执行难是一个老大难，而这次能实现这个攻坚那个执行难的基本解决，那么这个大的转变的背后的原因是什么呢？谢谢。
With Xinhua News Agency, we are aware that enforcement has long been a big challenge. Now it is basically addressed. What has made the difference? Thank you.
好，我简要对最后一个问题做一个回答。
I will take this last question.
这几年呢，我们全力以赴的攻坚执行难。
In these years, we have been working diligently on conquering this enforcement difficulty. For this campaign, in the 3 years' time, I have one feeling.
能够实现2到3年基本解决执行难这个阶段性目标。
If we can realize the first stage objective of this campaign, and if we have greatly transformed ourselves from the previous condition, then I think it is firstly attributable to the leadership of the CPC Central Committee with General Secretary Xi Jinping as the core, and its focus on governing the party stringently and the rule of law. Those are unprecedented political environment and legal environment for conquering enforcement difficulty. With that environment, I can never imagine that we can have such joint efforts within such a short time. And almost 3,900 banks can be integrated into our system. The information-based check system was in place. Before I was assuming my post as the Director General, this job has never been undertaken by anyone. Why is that? So I think the political environment paves the way. Secondly, the CPC Central Committee has been forging ahead with the modernization of social governance. We are the hitchhikers. With the modernization of the entire society, since enforcement is, in the final analysis, a problem of trust and credibility. So, building a trust-oriented society and a modernized society is a historical opportunity for us. Thirdly, levels of People's Congress supervised our enforcement progress, and our government is highly supportive of executors with higher sense of rule of law. Also, the People's Political Consultative Conference and the different levels of agencies are all supporting our execution. So that is unprecedented social basis for our enforcement. Fourthly, modernized information technology helps. It promoted the transformation of those information systems. The 4 obstacles of enforcement now are underpinned by those technologies. We kick-started our exploration of the information enforcement system since 2014. Without those first several years of experience accumulation, we can never dare to propose the idea of the 3-year campaign. So our confidence was cemented by the exploration in the early years because of the help of modern technologies. Fifthly, I would also like to take this opportunity to say something about the frontline officers who are willing to sacrifice themselves and make full dedication to their job. They have made unremitting efforts to the 3-year campaign. And the success of this campaign is indispensable from their contribution. Finally, I also want to take this opportunity to mention that while we were striving for conquering enforcement difficulties, our media friends were always the participants. They are helping us to promote the idea at the grassroots level. They are highlighting those glorious stories of our officers. They have also been promoting those good practices for us. They are also the supervisors of our practices. The online live streaming has been one key advancement in the media groups. I know that they have about 400 million audiences. So they have helped us to cultivate a very good public opinion basis. That's why now I would very much want to pay my gratitude to our present media friends. Thank you for your support of the People's Court, and thank you for your supervision and your support of our enforcement process. Thank you. This is the end of this press conference. Thank you, our 3 guests, and thank you all.